So you guys, I'd love you to meet Lynden. Can you tell us a bit about your work there, and also like before we dive into the music stuff, like your background in making film and everything?
Yeah. So I joined Ableton in December, so about 10 months ago. And I primarily work on their One Thing series and their artist documentaries with a colleague named Ralph in Berlin.
Awesome. The One Thing stuff is epic. I mean, I've loved those since they came out. And your mission was kind of to get representation happening on this continent in a way. Is that a fair statement? Because there's so much happening in Europe.
Yeah. The general consensus was that there wasn't enough happening over here in North America. So I focused on US, Mexico, and Canada.
Amazing. Have you had any pre-COVID? I saw you did some stuff in Mexico. Was there some good vibes down there?
Yeah, there was definitely. It was crazy because that's like the trip I think about the most, because it was in February, like right before lockdown, Right. And it was such a good time. And we met a lot of really cool folks. We hung out at Panorama Studios there in Mexico City, which they do some really cool work. And we were able to shoot 2 One Things in person before COVID hit with Il Gates and JK in LA.
Right, okay. And was that it? Then it was all just like done?
Yeah. Yeah. Now we're planning the future episodes and doing a lot of remote production. So we've had some cool artists who have been able to deliver remotely, which has been really nice.
Awesome, nice. Well, listen, we won't talk too much about your other work as well, because we're primarily, fascinated to talk to you about your process with Divorce Court. But as mentioned, and as you and I have said, like, I just find it really, I love it anytime anyone's like working across multiple disciplines and like has different projects on the go, like the whole process of keeping things balanced out. So, I mean, on Divorce Court, you've been releasing for like a couple of years, is that correct?
Yeah, like 2017 was my first release, and it's kind of weird because it coincides with the birth of my first kid. So like right after she was born, for some reason I had this like creative energy. And a little more confidence, honestly, in myself to like start releasing the music that I've been making for 5 or 6 years. So it's kind of nice that I can look back to when she was born, and her birthdays kind of represent like how long the project's been going.
That's rad. What can you unpack that kind of the feeling of confidence, or like whatever the mental shift was? Because you said you've been making music for like 5 or 6 years before that.
Yeah. So I think it's just like, when you, and any parent in the chat will probably understand, but I think when you have a kid, you realize like what you're capable of, and you kind of get perspective on the fact that like nothing really matters. Like all this frivolous stuff that we worry about, like our self-confidence, or like if XYZ is going to work out, like all I cared about was that my like children were happy and that my marriage was good. And then so everything else kind of just became a little bit easier to just let go of a little bit and just let it go. Because I listened to my first track that came out, like Memory, and like anyone, obviously there's a lot that I would change now, but I like to look at it as like a timestamp of where I was at the time, and just having the confidence to put something out there and see what happens. And I never expected any of it to get listened to. So I feel really lucky that anyone has listened to it so far. So I just keep kind of going with that mentality and seeing where it goes.
That's awesome. And was it like the build? Was it, people always talk about like, oh, you have a kid and then like suddenly everything changes. And, I found when my kids were born, it was much more of like I would say more of a crossfade than like a, massive hit on the downbeat. But
yeah,
was like built, was that kind of shift in perspective? Did that happen just around the birth and around the pregnancy and everything? Or did you just like wake up one morning and go like, hang on?
Yeah. I think it was more slow, because like she was born in November and that song came out in April. So if we're looking at like the crossfade mentality, that's like 5 or 6 months. I will say the weirdest thing about having a kid is like when you first meet them, you don't really like know them. So it takes time to, I thought I would like hold my daughter and be like, oh my gosh, like I know you, but I was kind of like this little stranger that took a little bit to get to know. So I think that's a better analogy. Like it took a couple months to like get it going. So
awesome. And with that release, is that did you like, was it a track that you had lying around and you just felt inspired to like get it done, or were you still making music through that time and through, you know, after her birth and everything?
That track specifically, I think the first two tracks came together the quickest. So I think I did start working on that after she was born.
Okay. Like they literally didn't exist before then? Like you started writing then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they didn't exist. Yeah.
Awesome.
And the project didn't really exist. I was just like messing around with sounds really, and kind of discovering like how to make the tracks myself. Because before that I had a project with a friend, and we needed a lot of production help to get the two singles out because I didn't really know how I wanted to finish them. So yeah, I think that was more of like an exploratory time period where I was like, okay, this is what it's called, and this is kind of the vibe that, you know, I want to portray.
Okay, great. Because I mean, what's rad with your music is it really has like a world to it and a very clear energy and aesthetic and everything going on. So are you kind of saying like that kind of like the aesthetic and the world and the universe that you wanted to build also like crystallized at that time after years of experimentation?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, and I always know like what influences it, but I wonder if when I had a kid, it kind of helped me connect to that younger self, because the project really is all about like this false sense of nostalgia that we have, and that's why the songs are like somewhat dreamy and like positive sounding, but a lot of the lyrical message is like somewhat sad at times. And I do sometimes have this false sense of nostalgia where I'll think about something really positive light, but then if I dive deeper on it, it was actually kind of a hard thing to go through. And I think when you have a child, you kind of look at them through this younger lens of life, and that's probably what helped shape the project, if I'm understanding it now.
Amazing. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I have to ask as well, just like having this like lovely juicy tidbit of like the whole process crystallizing after your daughter was born, like how did you manage what has been called the shock of lost adult freedom? Like when you have a child, your entire life changes, your routines changes, your sleep goes out the window. So most people would probably imagine like, oh, the time to launch a new project would probably not have coincided with the birth of your first child.
Yeah, that's true. I guess the one thing that I'm not good at like long sprints of work when it comes to creativity. Like if I'm doing my job and I'm editing, I can do it till we need to get it done. But when it comes to like my personal outlets, like having a kid forced me to write in really short snippets, like sit down for 30 minutes to an hour and get something out and then get up and leave and go take care of stuff. And I feel like that's something I didn't know about myself before. I would just sit down before I had a child on a Saturday and try to spend 5 hours making a track, which is usually not fruitful for me. But then when I was more busy, it like gave me more focus to where I said, hey, I only have 90 minutes right now. I have to like get in the zone quickly and do what I can and then step away and come back and try to finish this idea later, basically.
That's rad. And
I don't know if that answers your question.
No, 100%. I think that's brilliant. So you went and when you would sit down, did you have like a really clear sense of purpose? Like I need to go in and get this done, even if it's like I need to go sit down and write something, or I need to go in and like program some drums, or I need to, do you know what I mean? Like, did you have a clear agenda going into each of those sessions?
My good friend, Loudhound, who's another musician that I'm really good friends with, he's really calculated and good at all this stuff. He would laugh if I said yes, because he's trying to get me on like a calendar, right, where I like have my blocks. I'm no good at that, but what I will say is I bounce all my tracks after each session to a SoundCloud playlist, and then I listen to them throughout the next few days, and I'll take notes. So I do have notes.
Oh, rad.
Where I'll say like, hey, I need to, bring down the snare and like adjust the timing a bit, and then this synth part's just not working, so I'll rewrite the whole part or something. But I do have this, I struggle with this thing where I'll make like 20 versions of a song, and then 6 months down the road, I'll go back and listen to like version 2 or 1 and be like, that's the song.
Right.
And so I feel like I wasted time, but really I don't think it's a waste because you're exploring. But I do have this like this paralysis of finishing where I'm scared that it's almost done. And so I'll try to over produce the song, and then I have to go back cut it down.
Have you found that as you kind of like explored that whole process of going back to earlier versions, has that relaxed any tension around feeling like you need to work a certain amount or you need to put in a certain amount of effort for a song to be done? Like, do you look at stuff very differently now a few years into the project?
Totally. Yeah, I just actually had one of the songs on the EP, like, I basically accidentally turned it into a new song. So now this song has become two different songs. And then I went back to the first version of the track and I was just like, man, I need to just stop looking at like time frames and be okay with the song starting 15 days ago and having it be done, ready for like mixing. And that was kind of a big breakthrough. It's funny you asked that question because I was like, I'm always stuck in this thing where I'm like, oh, I take really long to finish songs. But I wonder if that's just like me telling myself that a good song takes X amount of time to be considered a good song.
So when you say getting over time frames, like you felt you didn't have to put in that amount of time or whatever, or that wasn't like, right. There wasn't, okay, cool. So you're kind of,
yeah.
And do you feel like more connected with your instinct now when you're creating in a way, or just like able to just trust in your own process a bit more?
I think so. Like, I'm still learning. And I think for anyone in the chat, like, I'll be the first to say, like, I'm not the most technical, like, producer or songwriter. I'm just drawn to like certain palettes and tones and tools. But like, I have so much to learn. And that's why I like this project, because every song I learn 20 new things, you know? But I think you're totally right. Like, I'm just like, you just kind of take it as you go, you know? And, sorry, I wanted to answer Noel's question about previous work coinciding with big life events.
Let's do it.
Before I forgot. I don't know if I would say that. I don't know. Maybe this one, I honestly didn't even like realize that until Damien asked me the question of like starting a new project when this big thing happened. Mm-hmm. But me and my wife tend to do like everything at once. Like, in 1 year, we got a new job, moved, had a kid, and then we'll like mellow out for a little while, and then a bunch of stuff will happen, which I wouldn't recommend.
Totally. Do you mind if I ask you like a little bit more about like not just your balance with family, but your journey with like film and music in parallel? Because had you been like the majority of your work had been on the film side of things, is that correct? And was like music more of a kind of passion as opposed to a day job?
Yeah, definitely. So, music's not yet. Music hasn't been a job for me. I'll play shows and I'm working on it every day when I'm not like working the jobs. But, I've found that so far that's kind of working because there's less pressure to look at a song or a release and say, if this release doesn't do well, then I won't be able to provide, as much.
Yeah.
Idea of separating it, but obviously down the road I would take the opportunity to make it my job, but right now I feel like it's in a good place. But I think growing up, I was making movies when I was like 12 years old with my cousins. We made this one horror film in his house called The Creeper.
Called the what? Sorry.
The Creeper.
The Creeper, right? Pre-Minecraft as well. You're well ahead of the curve.
Yeah. So. Oh man, Toy Factory. That's a big shout to my buddy Jose at Toy Factory. He's an amazing producer down in Mexico City.
Oh, amazing. Hey Jose, how are you? Can you tell us a bit more about Jose and Toy Factory actually while we're at it? Because I would love to unpack more about like the discipline of being able to like create and finish film and how that applies to music, but we'll unpack that in a minute. Maybe you could just tell us a bit of the vibes about, Toy Factory in Mexico and what's going on.
Oh yeah, definitely. He's an amazing producer. We connected through Ableton because he's been a user since like 2002.
Wow.
He's like an OG, and he's working on some really great playback tech stuff down there with some big bands in Mexico, and also just always producing tracks for different people and doing he just put out a couple remixes. I'd love if you would link one of them that he sent me the other day, if that's okay.
Yeah, Jose, if you want to throw those in the chat, buddy, please do. Awesome. So you're basically saying like the nice thing is that you're able to enjoy kind of music for its own sake. There's not like a pressure on it in terms of supporting the family or anything like that. And it sounds like is it a safe assumption that the type of work you do in film it's not like the death of your soul, like a cubicle job or something like that you hate, or working for a boss you don't like? Like, it's interesting enough to kind of keep your creative spirit alive?
The Ableton film stuff has definitely been my favorite job. I mean, essentially it's kind of a dream job in a way, you know. It's like you get to work on films about music. I will say I haven't always been that lucky. Like, I had a lot of years where I was able to collab with a lot of friends and work on cool projects, but the summer before I had the Ableton talks, so 2 years ago, I spent like 4 months editing a commercial for Lice Clinics of America.
Wow.
Because it was just like the agency, that was just the paid gig at the time. You know, it's just like that freelance work. So it hasn't
4
always
months
been like
on like a 30-second commercial, or
it was a 60-second Lice Clinics of America ad for Amazon to sell their new lice removal kit for parents.
Whoa.
For their kids. And they just, every morning I'd wake up to like 40 change notes and PDFs from the agency, and then we'd make the changes, and they just could never decide what they wanted.
Right.
And so it was pretty if anyone out there is doing work they're not passionate about, think of my Lice Clinics of America ad for 4 months. But no, it's amazing. And the people at Ableton are incredible folks. You know, they're just so kind and aware, and everyone's a music maker, which is great. But yeah, the film stuff has been really good to me so far, and it's really nice to be able to make money doing something creative, you know? So yeah, just continue to do it. But so the last note about like growing up with film and music, the start of it all was like DJing in high school. And then I always had this dream of like, and this is kind of an interesting intersection. Like, I always said I would love to be like a sound curator or sound designer for film. Like, I would watch a good film and think, wow, like the music in this film really made it. And that's what I was talking about, Let Go by Frou Frou. Like, anytime anyone used that song in a film, it would just make the scene like perfect for me emotionally. And now it's cool to be able to not only like pick the music for the film or make the music for the film, but like make the films. So yeah, man, it's cool. Like, it's cool that if you just keep trying to do what you've always done, like, it can work out if you are patient and take whatever comes your way, even a Lice commercial.
Right. And I'm curious as well, like, if you're going somewhere on a shoot, right? Like, you have to have your crap together, obviously. I'm sure, like, especially if you're going and shooting, like, it's going to be limited time. You have to like balance a lot of personalities. I'm sure you got like, what are the kind of things that you think about in that situation? I'm just really interested in this whole process of, you know, in music, if you have like a recording session, you go to a studio and it's like you have that amount of time. I think it's a lot more intense in film because there's so many more moving parts. And especially if you're, you know, I'm sure you're dealing with a lot more people who aren't used to being filmed if you're doing, you know, going into studios and that kind of thing. So do you have any specific processes or even like checklists you follow when you're like setting up or like getting ready to go? Like, do you have a whole flow you go through, or do you just kind of like remind yourself to bring batteries and like leave them by the front door?
Yeah, I like triple check my bag all the time. And I will say, like, you'll never meet a more stressed version of me like the day before a shoot.
Right.
Because I know that if I don't go to the shoot and get what we need, then it's a waste, or we have to go reshoot everything. So I tend to over stress about certain things like that, like when it's all on me. But every time you finish a shoot, you kind of, it's like in the studio session, right? It's like, you know, we got what we needed and it worked out. But I think checklists are good with anything, you know, and just being prepared and always studying the thing. Like, I love learning from other people and being open to like changing my process if someone else has a better idea of how to do it. You know, I like to always try to be a student because I think I'm not always right. Most of the time I'm wrong. So yeah, I've been able to be on these shoots with a lot of really great people, like my mentor, you know, and it's cool to be able to always adjust the process each shoot, I guess.
Okay, cool. So do you have to like, is there certain, do you have to like plan the exact things you're bringing based on whatever situation, or is there like a certain amount you just like have the basic tools and then make them work no matter what?
Yeah. So the nice thing about, the reason I was really excited about this job with Ableton specifically is because it was documentaries. And that type of shooting is my favorite, because you go there with a certain level of preparation, but you're also ready for anything that happens. And so you have to set up your equipment in a way that's suitable for like a left turn real quick, you know. I really don't like, I never enjoyed like those big structured shoots with huge crews and all these moving parts. I always like this more intimate thing. So
has that kind of mentality bled over into how you make music? Like, do you just kind of, you're open and available for any spontaneous things to happen and kind of roll with them? Or was music fun because you didn't have other constraints around as well?
I think it definitely bleeds over, because I don't think there's any rules in music. And yeah, I definitely like converted over from the documentary, like film mentality of like the lighter footprint and like trying to just do as much as you can on your own. Because I have a couple friends who went into music with a different mentality, where like they got a full band together and they wanted to hop into a studio and like get an engineer and record a record, which is great. But I love this this like painstaking process of trying to just do it all myself. Like something I really focused on with this new EP and with these 2 new tracks was like drums and percussion and programming. And if I was going to make Divorce Court a band right up front, I would have got a buddy who's a drummer and like had him write the drum parts with a little bit of creative input. But I think the journey of trying to do everything, or try to do everything yourself, and then realize what you're not good at to hand off to somebody else is a really fun process. Because like I know what my strengths aren't, and I'd be willing to hand things off. I'd love to, but this process of like, you know, finishing every single part on the track has been incredible, really. To be able to look at these points of like these moments where you finally like clicks. I can like look at little moments where it clicked, and I was like so elated to finally feel like, oh, I can do this. It's just confidence building, you know. So
that's beautiful. I love that. We just had a question from Swamp in San Francisco in the Bay Area. Sorry, Swamp. Lyndon, do you ever contract independently with studios before your dream gig? Super interested in how the sound gets into other things in the media from a contract B2B standpoint. Does that make sense for you, that question?
Yeah, totally. And that's an interesting question for now in like 2019, 2020 production, because it's kind of a shame, because there's so many easy routes to source music now with all the licensing sites like MusicBed and Artlist. They're great and the prices are fair, but it doesn't push us to go and search for music directly and like find those artists and support like those artists directly. It's almost too easy to just go on a music licensing site and search through 100 songs and pick one and click buy now, you know? But we did work a couple things. Like I did some pieces with an agency I worked for in Salt Lake, where I was able to like bring in friends' music who I really enjoyed and get the agency on board. And then they were able to collect like pretty nice fees from these brands and continue making music. So I think it's definitely there. It's just hard to, and this is kind of a journey I'm on with Divorce Court. I think in order to get on these contracts and like syncs is to find a really good partner that's going to pitch you to these studios and agencies, right? So you got to get your music with the right people who are going to set up these syncs for you. And that's like kind of hard to find the right people for that. So
it's always, the network becomes really important, doesn't it? And it's in a way, it's like you can never force a network either. So much of it is just like naturally finding who you find and building relationships across time, or, you know, or otherwise with your music getting to a point where you've got enough of a profile where people will start kind of reaching out for it naturally anyway. So Lyndon, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your process. I remember you actually saying in that email last night that you had transitioned a little bit from being a bit more obsessive about hardware synths and that kind of thing, and you've got really into like a fully in the box flow, but you're using like your 4-track and a couple of very carefully selected pieces to really have a massive impact on your sound. Do you mind kind of giving us all like a bit of an overview, both about that evolution and where you're at the moment?
Oh yeah, definitely. So over the years, as any young music producer would do, early on I thought I needed more. And so I went through and I bought some gear that I thought would help me be a better music producer. Turns out the gear doesn't make me better. But so when my daughter was born, I actually started this process of selling some gear. So I sold my lovely Juno 106 to pay for some birth bills, because having a baby is expensive. And that kind of put me down this path of looking at what I really need. And then thinking about, at that time, I was also, and when it's not pandemic time, I'm also on the road a lot. And so I started thinking like, to maximize my time and quick and like easiness of getting things done, maybe I should start thinking about it in the box setup. And so I started being like meticulous about what sounds I had in my library and like what plugins I would turn to help craft the divorce chord sound. And I have like I'm really happy with like the collection of plugins and sounds that I'm using. And I love to like support independent creators. So a lot of the sounds, like right off the bat, like the main pad that you talked about that was nice and warbly, like that is just one of my favorite go-to synths. Is actually a very affordable soft synth from Elephant. And it's this this preset that I tweak a lot called Astropad. And it's just this like beautiful pad sound from his analog ANLG like Ableton collection. And I honestly I reach for the Astropad like in most of my writing sessions because it's just got this incredible like warmth to it. And then I'll add a lot of compression and effects after the fact. But
awesome.
Yeah, I think an in the box like setup is nice. And then for me at least, I love gear though. I mean, it looks so beautiful and it's fun to use. But I will have the time one day, And then I'll run it out to like my Roland 404. I mainly use as like an effects box. So on
like
the
an
intro
insert effect kind of thing, or a effect send, or
yeah, sometimes as like an insert, but like I'll just like send a full stem out to it and then bring it back in. So like on the intro of Desolk 2.0, that's just like me taking the final mix, throwing it through the filter, and then when it opens up for those guitar strums, like that's just bouncing it back in, basically the whole track.
Right. Wow.
It's a really fun effects box. And then I've been for the lo-fi project, my Dreamtax project, I've been doing more like chopping like samples on there. Truncating is what they call it, I think. Okay. Samples. It's a painstaking process, but it gives it like a really interesting feel. And then the Slow Songs project was that Tascam 424 is a newer piece of gear that my wife got me for Valentine's Day, which is like the dopest gift ever. Valentine's Day. Yeah. And that was my and I was really influenced by Blank Forms. He's kind of become a friend through Ableton. We got to go to lunch and talk, and I just think his music's so warm and lush. If you guys haven't heard it, Blank Forms is making some amazing tape music, but we talked about it kind of over lunch, and then I was like, okay, I think I'll buy it. And then the Slow Songs EP was my first foray into sending full songs into the Tascam and seeing like what it will do. And it was really incredible seeing that the songs kind of took each song took a new life, basically, because I could hear textures that I didn't even know existed in the track when they were slowed down on tape. So
right. So when you say like putting everything over, you're obviously going to a 4-track. So are you like sending a whole mix over, or are you sending certain elements and putting stuff back in the computer, or what's your process around that?
So with this one, since it was all final bounces and I didn't want to basically recompose each track, I was just sending the master into the tape, only using 2 tracks basically, because I was panning left and right. But with the new studio setup, I hope to start like sending, and especially one thing I did want to talk about like going forward is being able to do more with less tracks, because my early tracks had so many layers, but I'm starting to learn more about sound and EQ and like where to place things and how to make something sound bigger with less. So eventually I think I'll be able to get to a place where I could bounce out a final song that's broken down into like 4 tracks, basically, where I have all the synths on track 2, all the drums and bass and vocals.
Amazing. Rad. That'd be great. Can I unpack something you were saying earlier about, like, I really love what you were just talking about with getting really clear on, like, building your library and kind of defining your sound. Like, I'd love to know both philosophically your approach for that, but also I'd really love to know about, like, some of the real nitty gritty, like, how are you organizing them? Like, how do you keep your presets? How do you keep all your kind of settings available? I know you're in live, so I know a little bit obviously about how to save stuff in there, but can you walk us through your whole process? Maybe start philosophically about, like, even how you gathered stuff in your process of choosing things, and then we can get into the...
I started thinking, I got really into in the last like 2 or 3 years, I've gotten pretty into cooking, more as of like a necessity, because we're like a family of 4 now.
Mm-hmm.
The 4th one isn't really eating solid foods yet, but looking forward, I thought, like,
I'm glad you qualified that statement, by the way. It's like, that's going to be some heavy therapy bills for the little boy in like 20 years otherwise.
Exactly.
Sorry, carry on. So you've been cooking and it got you thinking.
Yeah, I've been cooking and thinking about, like, we can't eat out as much, and we got to, like, be more conscientious with what we eat and, like, health, because that's a journey in itself. In your 20s, you realize when you're a teenager, you eat Del Taco for breakfast every day, but you realize that catches up to you pretty quick. So yeah, I got into that, and then a friend of mine, a music maker, Brian Funk, he makes really great packs in which I use a ton of on my track as well. He did a track podcast. He's a podcast host called Mise en Place, and using that everything in its place technique with music, and like having your space not only be like a bliss station, as Austin Kleon would say in this book, by the way, which I read this year, and I just can't say enough about how good it is. It's
amazing. I've read Share Your Work and Steal Like an Artist, but I haven't read that one yet. Yeah.
This new one, for me was definitely my favorite, but he talks about having a bliss station, which in what I see here, your studio looks very blissful to me. And when I was there, it's really nice.
Yeah. Do you want to describe that for folks who aren't maybe necessarily immediately grabbing it?
Yeah. So Austin Kleon talks about having this place that's free of anything that's stressful to you, and a place that you feel like is blissful to sit down at and work. And incidentally, his is actually in his garage in Austin, Texas, but he's created this really cool, like, workbench for his writing with all of his art on the walls and like all of this really interesting these creative prompts, to like get him going. And so I was really focusing on the bliss station physically, and not only that, but like when I go into my computer, because we spend so much time with our computers, like how can I make my relationship with this like library of sounds also blissful? And so I started like kind of veering off of the plugins that I started with and like the sounds that you kind of collect early on, because that's what and started diving into these like independent creators or just like smaller companies that I didn't hear about much, and really thinking about like what the sounds do to me, like emotionally. Because this whole project, like, I'll be the first to say, I'm not like we talked about before, like I'm not technically sound with chord theory, and I won't jump on like a synth and start jamming out. Like it's hard for me to like play the guitar or play a synth, which is why the Push 2 for me is like the best thing I ever bought, because it helps me get the ideas from my head to the final track. But I'm like a very emotional songwriter, so I started reaching for all of these sounds as a chef would for like high top shelf ingredients, and trying to refine my palette there. And then that kind of helped transfer over into like my even how I write chord progressions and how I program certain sounds.
So yeah, I don't know if you got that question, but I was just asking about whether you treated that kind of curation of the sounds as like its own process. So were you just like sitting down and trying to find stuff? And then also I'm curious as well, like in terms of building your library, what did you do to actually clear out the stuff that you didn't like?
Yeah, so I have an archive folder where I'll go through my sample library every once in a while, and I'll just I'll delete stuff sometimes, but mainly I'll create an archive folder to where maybe 5 years from now, I'll want to work on a project that's more like, like disco house, and I'll have those old drum samples that I loved, or like those cool inspiration starters. But I try to keep my library, my sound library, like pretty small for the current like situation. And it's different for me because I'm not working with tons of different artists and tons of different genres, right? I'm basically working in 2 genres on these 2 projects. And so I try to keep it like visually clean, and then I'll put anything I want like right at the top. Like I always use, 4 to 6 different libraries that I love, or like, and I started to get really creative and meticulous with my colored folders within Live as well, and changing the names of them rather than like what they are, like changing them to be like, color, or like trying to figure out my tag section.
You're talking about using like the tagging system in Live. And I'm really curious as well, like if you buy like a specific instrument or a specific library, it's a dilemma I'm actually kind of trying to figure out a little bit for myself at the moment. Do you like throw out things you don't like in there? Or if it's a synth, do you have a way of organizing presets? Like do you make individual kind of instrument channels in Live that you just drop in with those sounds loaded up? Or do you have like a curation method within a synth that has a bunch of its own settings?
Yeah, I'll make like a group of like a synth plus a couple effects that I've created that like really were the anchor of a certain track and I really love. Like there's this one arpeggio that I created, like an effects chain on this new track that's coming out that I recently like put into a folder, and I've started to call it like my divorce chord like selects basically. Mm-hmm. But I also want to go back through all of the releases and create custom instruments and like presets for everything, because at this point, I mean, it's kind of, I enjoy it. Like every time I open a new project, I start fresh. But there's also like callbacks that I want to make sound wise. And so I'm actually, this week I was in the process of doing that. And I was thinking about just like making a free like sample, like loop pack of like some of the loops that are within the songs, just because it's not that hard. And sometimes I'll take those loops and get inspired for a whole new song. I'm taking a loop within a track that's been released and then getting inspired for a whole new song. So yeah, I'm kind of in the process of doing that as well right now. I've been, getting into a lot more user presets, especially with the lo-fi hip hop stuff for Dream Tax. Like that stuff is very methodical, and like I've created some piano presets that I really love. And so that's kind of what put me down the path of doing like that for Divorce Chord as well.
Love it. I love it. So is it a bit more like as if you're making something and something sticks, then you'll kind of keep to it? Sorry, I keep like really want to make sure I fully understand your flow. So I guess you have like the broader, making sure your settings are available through tags, and then like if you create something and you like it, you're starting to build up a library of those as well. Library of not only loops but like presets as well. Right. Okay. And then the presets, will you still have those like within a synth, or do you put them into like a rack or something in Live so that they're like, I'm kind of curious about where you're loading them from, if you know what I mean. I'll put them into a rack so they stay in that user library within, and typically a sound for this project is created with like a few different assets more than just like the synth preset or the tweak, right? So okay, so it's like a whole kind of chain kind of thing. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. That's great. Yeah, I feel like I've done a little bit of that, but could easily spend like a couple of months building those out. And I think it's such a good point you're making as well about like getting stuff from tracks that's worked. Did you I really love how, you're just saying like really having a clear vision for kind of the sound world and the feeling, and how the tones are informing the feeling, and that almost like that then informs your writing as stuff. So you've kind of created this like positive feedback loop to give your project identity. Did you have to go through any kind of mental switch? Because I think what we can do as producers, getting back to what you're saying earlier, is there's this concept like anytime we build a track, like everything has to be made from scratch, and we can never reuse the same thing or anything like that. But I mean, you never see AC/DC being like, you know what, we had that kind of the big Marshall stack Gibson SG guitar sound on the last track, so we can't do it again. Do you know what I mean? But was there a kind of a process to like unlocking that revelation, or was there like a frustration beforehand, or did it just kind of naturally evolve?
Yeah, I think the frustration occurred in all of these songs I've written in between that haven't seen the light of day, because they just didn't feel like they fit, you know? And so
interesting.
I feel like, because I mean, I don't know, I think I have 7 or 8 singles out for Divorce Court, but I've probably written close to finishing, you know, like 25 songs or so. And there's like 100 to 200 more ideas, right? But these songs are like I've played a lot of those songs live even, and they've just never felt like they matched. And so in order to maximize my like efficiency, I think at this point, I want to do the like preset and the more organized process, but I never want to get to a point where it's not creative and where I just open up a template and have the same drums, the same bass synth, and the same synth and start writing. Like I never want it to be templatized. And so it's trying to find that balance of organization without taking away from like the discovery feeling of a new sound or a new feeling.
What was the hip hop project called again? Because there's Divorce Court and...
Yeah, the hip hop project's called Dream Tax, and it's just like lo-fi beats.
Okay.
Like I've been listening to like I know it's very cliche in 2020, but I've been listening to a ton of like Chilled Cow and Chillhop, like study beats when I work. And even, I mean, I feel like those producers don't get enough credit for how creative their progressions and like drum programming and their ability to create such a mood with so little, so few elements. And it's like the Chilled Cow, like that stream, like the Study Girl stream, they're to the point now where nothing on there is samples, like from other tracks, right? Because they have to, you know, make sure it's all cleared because they're a label now. But I'm sure that there's it's hard though, because you pick apart like who's really producing tracks and who's using splice sounds. And I found a couple that I think Arbor, Arbour, is like one of my favorite producers right now. Like he's a Washington-based producer. He's like lo-fi, but he's more like ambient. Like he'll sample guitars and like acoustic pianos, and he's just like an incredible producer. So sometimes I'll go to those artists or streams, and since it's so melodic, and it's usually in similar keys that I write Divorce Court in. A lot of those like sad major keys with like hopeful tones. I'll write lyrics while listening to like those tracks.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah. And I won't even think about the track itself when I'm writing the music, but like I separate the two completely. I write lyrics away from my computer, usually on my phone in this one app. Depending on what I'm doing, if I'm sitting somewhere waiting or in bed late at night. But I find that like writing lyrics at the computer doesn't work for me.
Feels and writing much like you're writing an email or something.
Exactly.
Yeah. Like, why do all my songs start with "I hope this finds you well"?
Cheers. Yeah. So I don't know. That's a cool technique that I love. It's like writing lyrics to other music.
That's really great. I love that. And are you like thinking about like meter and cadence and all that kind of thing, or is it much more just like kind of stream of consciousness flow to get like the kind of subject and the concepts going, then you extract out like when you sit down and listen to your music? Or
yeah, it's more just like subject really, because I think that's like a important part. The tricky thing is like none of the Divorce Court songs really have that many lyrics anyways. Like there's like one verse, one chorus, or 2 chorus songs or some repetition. But I think since it's so like spacey, it doesn't feel like, oh, they're repeating it again. Because repetition is great, but like sometimes it's not great. So
you need that makes sense. But what I was really curious about was I feel like we can assume that there's like, you know, they're both you've got your aesthetics you like in the 2 projects. So could you kind of share with us like what the process was where you realized that there are these 2 separate things and separate sounds emerging? and how that then, like, how you're managing having these two different projects with their own, I imagine, related but kind of distinct identities. And when you sit down to write, is it like one or the other? Do you let things evolve and push it in one direction or the other? And then likewise, how does that affect the library stuff?
Yeah, so it is so much easier for some reason to collaborate with DreamTax than it is with Divorce Court. Like, Divorce Court is like very personal to me, and like I'm really open to collaboration, but it's really scary to me because I never want to. I don't know. I'm still learning how collaboration in music works, really. And I think it was David Byrne who said, like, the number one rule of collaboration is to take whatever someone gives you and take it for what it is, because it's their creativity and their voice, you know, and that's it. And I would never want to collaborate on a track for Divorce Court and have it not see the light of day because I didn't feel comfortable about it, you know. But with DreamTax, I've already done 2 tracks with friends, and I love what they did, and I let go of it really. It was really easy. And so I feel like DreamTax is the outlet that helps me continuously make music when the pressure of Divorce Court has like gotten to be too much for me to create that day. Because sometimes I'll sit down and it's just like very heady. Like it's very, I think it's because it's more personal and I'm singing on it and the lyrics are all like from my own experiences. Whereas DreamTax might as well not have a name to it or a face to it, because it's just music that I love the sounds and I love making, and it's more of like a practice.
Okay, interesting.
If that makes sense. And it's really nice to have 2 projects because it keeps me creating, and it, instead of thinking I'm not in the mood that day to make one project, I can like sit down and make music for the other project, you know.
And like, is there like is it much more of like an internal difference between the 2 projects then, or is it like an aesthetic difference, or is it kind of like a point of view difference? I mean, you've described quite a clear different headspace, but if you end up like making a song that kind of sounded like Divorce Court but felt like DreamTax, is there like a difference there, or is DreamTax like a lot more just open in terms of what it can be sonically as well, even though you've said it's in quite a clear genre that you really like?
So it's funny, my recent track that came out for DreamTax was like featuring Divorce Court because I sampled the vocal from Indonesia, my track Indonesia.
Oh,
and so,
okay. Yeah, I saw you posting all about like someone had sampled it. I was like, that's cool. And then someone sampled you. I didn't realize it was yourself at the time. Actually, maybe
I've actually had a lot of people sample that song on YouTube, but someone stole the song and put it in a free hip hop producer trap sample pack. And so all these young hip trap producers thought the sample was cleared. And I found via DistroKid, it like showed me all the YouTube links where my song was being used. And I was like, hey, this is, thanks for doing this, but this is my track.
So what, did you get into takedowns, or did you just say like?
So I actually got into takedowns with certain people that didn't respond or weren't super kind about it, and then me and this one kid who made like a pretty cool beat with it, we did a takedown, and then he hit me up later and was like, hey, can I repost it? The takedown was kind of weird because with DistroKid, like, they were making money off of it, and it was just the full track, you know. But I got into, he basically asked if he could re-upload it to SoundCloud where he had a bigger following and just give me credit in the description, and I was like, yeah, that's fine. Like, it doesn't matter. It's not like I have a label to answer to for that stuff yet, so it was fine. And he was pretty nice. I think he's younger too, like 17 or 18. So I was like, you know what? Like, he probably spent a long time on this beat, and it sounds pretty fire. So let's just like let him post it. So yeah.
And I mean, so is it pretty much like one of those lasted? Because I think that is a really interesting aspect to making music, that just the whole thing of getting sampled or your stuff getting pulled into a different context and how you handle these situations. And this actually probably, I still want to unpack more about like the 2 worlds of DreamTax versus Divorce Court, but I think this is a perfect segue. Also, maybe we can tell people about Lately.fm and all your work on there, because we're getting into some really interesting stuff of like, how do you share music? How do you use kind of platforms of broadcasting music, talking about music? So do you mind telling everyone like both sides about what Lately.fm is about? And maybe if you have a link you can throw in the chat while we're talking here, that'd be great.
Yeah, totally. So in college, my buddy Kevin and I started this little music blog called Neighborhood Brains, and we ended up covering a lot of really great artists at the time in that early chillwave movement, which is what inspired the divorce court sound. That 2009 to 2012, those like years of, you know, like early Youth Lagoon, Washed Out, Tori Moi, Small Black, Slow Magic, like all of these like Teen Days' early stuff. We kind of wrote about all these artists when they were super early on, and they were all so grateful and like so respondent, and like they would send us early links. And like being just a music fan at that time and not a music maker, it was like such a great thing to feel like it mattered to these artists, and that this like promo from DIY outlets was helpful. And so that kind of fizzled out a few years later when like chillwave went away and we got into like the blogosphere, like EDM stuff, you know, like disco house and all that stuff. Internet changed, and you could no longer post tracks as easily, and we just weren't like technically savvy enough to build like a real platform. We were just doing it on WordPress, you know, like, cause I'm not like a web designer. And then in 2016 or so, right before I started Divorce Court, my buddy Kevin and I re-upped it as an Instagram page, because that kind of became a new platform, and we called it LatelyFM. And it's kind of the same thing. It's just like, we don't take any paid promo. We just go out and discover super DIY artists in this like chilled out, like surf rock, chill wave, indie, like bedroom pop field. And it's kind of growing a little bit in our like tastes, but yeah, so we did that. And then we started this Spotify playlist. It doesn't have like the same growth as the paid playlists, you know, but I think the listeners who do listen really enjoy it. We'll do like 100 a month. And then we just launched the YouTube stream, which is in and out of commission because some of whitelisting hasn't been working. So every time a song from our catalog gets played, sometimes the label's AdSense blocks the song. So we had like a few solid viewers yesterday, but then it would just go black, and I think people would leave because there's no music. But it's been a cool journey trying to see how to live stream on YouTube 24/7 using a remote server. And I just like doing these little projects that help learn something new that's like current, you know.
I'm really fascinated actually to know what like the makeup is for those streams. Like, are they like, is it the equivalent of like YouTube playlists, or is it like you're saying it's live stream, then you have those tracks elsewhere just being beamed? Or I'm always a bit confused about like quite how they work, or do people have to upload them to your account, then they're basically like your YouTube videos to monetize, or
so I'll show you. We're not monetizing currently. We got permission from all the artists to monetize because they gave us we use SubmitHub as our tool to take in music.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just showing folks as well, SubmitHub is like a platform where you can submit your music to different bloggers. You can basically, bloggers will have like themselves registered on here with the type of music they listen to and all that kind of thing. And you, I think they have a free tier, which I mean, it's worth like paying for the paid tier. And it's basically like a kind of way to streamline getting your music to blogs and playlists and that kind of stuff. Is that a fair kind of description of SubmitHub?
Yeah, totally. And SubmitHub is actually like it's really like damaging to your ego if you're doing it yourself.
God. Yeah.
I would almost recommend giving the login to a friend and letting them manage it for you, because I promise you, like with every song I've ever submitted, I've gotten maybe 1 to 3 outlets and 40 outlets saying no thanks, don't like the vocals, bad fit, like sounds okay. Like it's just kind of like you're about to put out a song and then you're reading all these email chats about like how much they don't like the song. And so when I respond for LatelyFM, since I've been on the artist side of it, I try to be like really like, hey, this sounds great. The vocals are awesome. I know it's going to do well, but this is just not a genre that we typically take.
Right.
Because that's usually the case. Like we're kind of specific just because of like how people on the blog, like what they enjoy, you know, and what Kevin and I enjoy listening to.
Yeah. I mean, I briefly ran a first version of my label a couple of years ago and was submitting stuff for artists to SubmitHub. And I found like, yeah, you submit to 40 or 50, maybe get up to 3 placements. But it's that whole thing where if you're using the paid tier, it's important for people to understand as well, like the people you submit to, if they review it on the paid tier, they're obliged to reply to you. It's like that's kind of part of the contract. So
Well, yeah, you'll
I think,
get like pinged from them if you're not, because
Yeah.
if you don't reply, they have to refund the artist the
totally.
credit.
So yeah, you can imagine for someone sitting there and going through like, I don't know, hundreds of things in a day or whatever, and they're getting like all worn out and jaded. And also like when you're discovering like, well, which blogs actually are on the wavelength or which reviewers, I think that must be such a big part of the process, is actually figuring out where your stuff is a good fit. And I really appreciate that you mentioned that. It's
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing on SubmitHub, I think, sorry to cut you off, is like the most important things are, like, as a blog, I'll tell you, because I have a ton of submissions to go through today. But I think most of them don't even know LatelyFM. They just like click down the list and just
right.
hope. I try to submit to blogs that I think are going to work. But the biggest thing is your artwork. Like, if I find a really, really great album art, I'm going to listen to the song. And that's kind of huge because it's the first thing we see. Like, I saw this incredible artwork from this label called Z Tapes this week. And even before I listened to the song, I just like knew I was going to like the song. And so that was kind of
interesting.
Cool. And then
can we dive into that? Like, is there a type of artwork that you see and you're like, oh my God, like, is it like if someone's just like put black and white text on Keynote, are you just like, you know?
Yeah. Like, I respect like minimalism, but I think like the artwork that you send is going to match the sound. And I can usually tell like it's weird, but I can usually kind of tell what kind of track it's going to be with the artwork and the title of the song. Like, all these songs live in different like fields of like the visual aesthetic that ties to the genre. And it's kind of an interesting thing if you're talking about like your artistic license. Like, it's funny to think of the music you're making almost will also match with the types of visuals that you enjoy. So
I think it's something, you know, we rarely talk about as like music producers, but it's really important. And incidentally, folks, on Complete Producer Network, there's like a visuals, graphic design, branding, and styling topic, because I think it's really, really important that we talk about that and we're aware of it. And you can also see, like, you know, when there's like Lida Pimienta is an amazing example. She like literally went to art school, so you see artists who are amazing musicians and visual artists, and like what an asset that is to be able to build out both sides.
I always think about Chaz from Tori Moa, like his design work and the like merch that he makes. I'll buy his merch because I like him as a designer, not even just because I like his records.
Right.
When we went to the Bon Iver, Sharon Van Etten like stadium tour last year, like like the merch, like obviously at a stadium tour the merch is expensive, but like the quality of the designs and the print, like the print quality, like made me feel justified in spending on it. So it's kind of interesting to think about that too. Like, I would never want to deliver merch for a high price where someone didn't want to wear it because it wasn't like comfortable, you know, or like didn't fit right, you know.
But in terms of like your point is like when you're going through submissions, I mean, how many will you have? Is it like just a massive long list of stuff and you're kind of saying anything that will immediately give a good impression of the music is actually quite beneficial?
Yeah, they put it anything like that. And then at this point, we kind of know which artists we've worked with in the past. And kind of if we see their release come through, like, we kind of know that it's going to be something that we're into. But to this, it's interesting too, though, to note, like, this week I found for our playlist in October that came out last week, like, a lot of the songs on the playlist were free submissions.
Okay, great.
I don't just listen to premiums, you know, like right now I have 2 premiums and 34 standard submissions to go through. But I know in those standards, just from looking at these photos and titles, like, that there's going to be some cool ones. And the genres are really important. And like the artist sounds like are really important. So yeah, I think it's a great tool. I will say, like, I attribute some of my listens on Divorce Court for sure to SubmitHub because I was able to land on a couple platforms that their playlists then influenced a couple other really nice playlisters to listen to the music and put on YouTube.
Kind of domino effect kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a good tool. If you're affected by negative comments, let someone else do it.
Yeah. I mean, that's just really why I wanted to mentioning that and just be really clear. Like, if you go into it and like expect, you know, that people are gonna like say some terrible things or whatever, but just like, you know, just go like it's kind of like the signal to noise ratio or whatever. But yeah, I think that's a great idea about having someone else go through it for you. Can I ask you about like the sounds like thing, right? Because I'm sure anyone who's uploaded like their own music to this kind of a platform and then gone, well, what do I sound like? I mean, I guess maybe with your background and really having a clear sense of the types of music you like, that you were blogging about, that you kind of were letting consciously influence divorce court, maybe was that a bit easier for you? But nonetheless, do you have any advice, like if people are trying to figure out that sounds like thing? I mean, the flip side as well is like I make so much music, I'm actually very rarely listening to music as well. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, silence, right?
Do you have any like tips on that side?
Yeah, I don't think you have to listen to the song and say, this sounds exactly like this artist. I think what you should do, and what I do, is I think, who are the top 3 artists that influenced me or have influenced me? Mm-hmm. Even if I know, like, well, this song doesn't sound like this artist, I know that when I listen to that artist, someone else who listens to that artist might also feel those feelings when they listen to my music. You know, so, because I don't think I sound like anyone, and that's not on purpose. I just can't. Like, everyone has their own sound. And although in the beginning I would have loved to sound just like this, and this, it was a hard thing to grapple with in like 2 years in, to be like, man, this is just my sound and I have to be okay with it. And I hope people like it. And if not, I'm just going to keep doing it. Mm-hmm. But I think you have to accept early on to be like, I don't sound like anyone. The music I make is not the music that I always love to listen to. It's different. Like, it comes out differently because it's coming out from within my brain, basically.
Right.
Maybe that's too like meta, but
no, it's really interesting. Yeah. I mean, because I think this whole question of like the different situations you can be in as an artist, and how do you make a first impression when you're trying to, you know, find the people who can actually have a positive impact on getting your music heard, and how can you present yourself? Like, you know, I've worked behind the scenes making records, but I've had, you know, if someone sends a letter to my management or to me saying like, hey, here I am, this is my project, I do this, I'm trying to do this is where I'm at in the whole process, here's a playlist and what we're trying to do this, and we would love you to come in and bring this to the table, or this is an area where we're not sure where to go, then that is like so much that I can actually respond to. Whereas I've had people going like, yo, I just finished an EP, let me know if you resonate. And it's like, what the hell am I going to do with that? You know, so as someone, do you have any like best practices you could suggest to people, more putting on your kind of reviewer, sorting through stuff hat, like advice for people on that side?
I think the middle ground is important, right? Like, say enough, but there's no time to like, it's not, you know, you're not getting paid like very much. It's like cents on the dollar, right, to do these reviews. And LatelyFM is not a moneymaker. Me and Kevin just do it because it's fun, and the artists that we work with are really cool. But I don't want to read like 3 paragraphs in an email about, I don't like copy pastes. We get a lot of PR emails.
Right.
And it's like a copy paste and all this stuff. And I feel like the only thing that like a outlet wants to feel like when they read your email is that you know who they are and that you know why you're sending it to them specifically. And not just that you hit reply all to like 40 of the last outlets that you use. And I know it's harder for the person sending it out, but I'll handwrite emails. Like, there's this really great YouTuber that posts some of my music named David Dean Burkhart, and like, he's huge and I love his selection, and whenever I get a track on there, I'm stoked. I'll send him an email like asking how he's been, telling him, you know, how grateful I am that he posted this song on this date. And it's not phony, like that's my real gratitude, and that's just me trying to be honest, instead of just being like, new track from Divorce Court releasing this day, click here, you know, like, right. That's not gonna like feel personal to anyone.
Cool.
And at the end of the day, music listening is like pretty personal. And so even if you're on the reviewer side, so I try to just be as human as possible. Is my biggest thing. And don't make it too long, like 3 sentences.
3 sentences.
3-4 sentences. It feels good to me.
And what are the things that you think, like, if there was an ideal email submission for you, if we like, what would it have on there? And I know there's no one size fits all, but let's just run with a hypothesis.
Human language, like, hey, like in the subject line, even like, hey, lately, here's a new like surf rock jam from Colombia-based artist. This, hope you dig it, or something shorter. But right. And then in the body of the thing, like, give me a link and tell me a little bit about when it's coming out and what they've done, and I love to listen to it. Like, but when it's like this long, I don't, like.
Do you get like an immediate like, oh God, or you expect me to read that before you've even hit a thing? Like just like a subliminal kind of reaction? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, because it's almost like if you're sending someone, and I'm not like a music industry person, so I'm probably like, real PR people are probably like, ugh, this guy's so dumb. But if you're sending a random email to someone you don't know, you can't expect that they're going to care about you. Like, you almost have to earn their care and earn their trust by like creating some sort of personal connection or just being normal and like sending like a handwritten. It's almost like, would you rather get like a handwritten letter or like a postcard that's been printed that's like pre-sorted from DirecTV that says like sign up now?
Yeah.
So I don't know, but it's hard. If you're a big PR firm, you can't do that every time. But when you're doing it all yourself, like with these smaller artists or with Divorce Court, I do everything myself, so I can expect myself to do these. But if I had like a PR agency, I wouldn't call them and be like, you're not making the emails human enough, Right. But that's the glory of being a DIY artist.
Totally. But you do hear so much about like, for journalists and reviewers, if they actually get the feeling that the artist themselves has written stuff, they're way more likely to open it or engage with it than if it's just like a copy paste. And actually, like a funny aside, there's been, on Complete Producer Network, I've noticed a couple of people have just like in the About Me and Why I'm Here stuff, they've just pasted in their generic artist bio. Yeah. And it's written in the third person when the thing is like about me, and it's like, oh, that's not really going to connect. You know what I mean?
Yeah, artist bios are always hard for me. Like, I don't. Yeah. When you asked me to send you one, I just wrote it out right there because I was like, what am I doing right? And I'm not going to talk about myself in third person. Like, you're not getting it from my fake manager. You know what I mean?
Totally. Yeah, taking me a while to like. I think I keep flip-flopping back and forth in the first and third kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's like early internet. It was
like you hit a certain level, right, where it would probably make sense. But
well, kind of, yeah. I mean, like say on my management's website, it makes sense that their bio about their client Damien is like third person. But then my really basic personal website, I wound up. It was in third person in like 2005 because at that point I think the internet, we still thought it was meant to be like a magazine. Do you know what I mean? And then at some point you realize like, well, if you've got a website, you've put it there, haven't you? So
you're paying someone every month to use the website, right? I did this Kickstarter campaign for this speaker company in like 2012 that I was doing videos for, and the minute that the founder changed his emails to like be from his first name was like when the Kickstarter got funded. Like when people started getting inboxes from this dude's name at this, like suddenly people were clicking through, and some companies do that really well, but some companies, you can tell it's like a tactic.
Wild. I love it.
Like my sister is watching and she just said, talk about Mudwater, because like they have really great marketing, and I already talked about it because I set a coffee every day. But
okay, yeah, tell us about it.
So yeah, Mudwater is just like it's like a mushroom powder with like reishi chuck, cordyceps, lion's mane, a little bit of chai, and then like cinnamon and sea salt and cacao, and it tastes like mud, but it like gives you this like
in a good way.
Yeah, it's not like chai though. It's not like spicy chai. It's not sugary or anything. It just has like neutral muddy, spicy flavor. But it's like people liken it to Adderall. I've never taken Adderall before, but like when I drink it, I'm like productive until 7 p.m. and then I don't crash afterwards. And I stopped drinking coffee because not only would I crash, but I'd get creatively doubtful around 2 or 3 p.m. with my morning coffee. I would drink way too much caffeine, and then in the afternoon, I'd just be like, I hate everything. I'm so bad at this. And so the minute I stopped drinking caffeine, personally, this is just me, like my wife does great on caffeine. Yeah. The minute I stopped drinking caffeine, my output like went through the roof as far as like being okay with what I'm writing, what I'm making and stuff. So
awesome. And so
maybe it's all in the head.
Was there a kind of like a branding thing on Mudwater, or was that just like a totally separate thing, just like Mudwater is working well for you?
Well, if you want like to read about like some really nice email campaigns that feel really personal, like they're like, once you sign up for the newsletter, it feels like someone's emailing you, even though it's all templatized. Like they've done a really nice job at like creating a nice voice for the brand.
Are you down with Derek Sivers, or does anyone in the chat know who Derek Sivers is? He's a founder of CD Baby. Wrote an amazing book called Anything You Want, and he's just been launching a bunch more books. Has a great couple of TED Talks out there, but he's kind of famous for kind of communicates this concept that you should have a database basically of everyone you've ever met, and have them like sorted into people you should be contacting like every day, every week, every month, every year, or whatever, just to like maintain relationships. And on all of his blog posts, everywhere, it's like his personal email, and he's like, send me an email, I'll reply. And apparently he does reply literally to every single email. But he had a couple of books launched recently, which are just like a collection of his blog posts, which are brilliant. I'm on his email list. I'd never emailed him, but he sent out the thing about, here's my books, and I ordered them straight away. And I was like, hey, Derek, sent him an email, just hit reply. Just ordered these. This is great. Just wanted to let you know, like I was in New Zealand for 4 months last year, and I read literally all of his blog posts top to bottom. I was like, just wanted to let you know I read those top to bottom, and it was rad, and, got a reply. And there's a couple of lines reply, but I've had other friends who've told me before, they're like, oh, have you ever emailed him? Like he literally replies, but apparently he's replying to like 10,000 emails or something like that. Goodness. But that's very interesting seeing his blog, because he really talks about that being like a conscious choice about the way he's trying to do stuff. And anyway, but it's a really interesting concept of like you can just very genuinely be yourself on the internet and kind of connect with people. And what I'm leading this back to with LatelyFM, and the fact you're doing music and us talking about these things from the two sides, is ultimately you'd like, I think you keep saying that thing about like speak like a human, like be yourself, and actually like make a human connection. Because we all know it's coming, it's like a one-to-one thing. It's not like via a billboard in Times Square or something like that.
And that's the biggest thing with like documentaries, right? Like when you're interviewing someone, it takes a little bit of time to get them comfortable and to like kind of guide them into a place where they feel like they're being 100% genuine. And that maybe is like something I've learned from that, it's just like to be vulnerable and genuine and just be a human being. Because I think the biggest mistake we can make is like assuming that everyone is out to get us or hates us right away, right? Like,
can you unpack that a bit more for us?
I feel like, this year especially, I've gone through this with so much disdain in the world for everybody else. Everyone hates everyone else in 2020. Like, so-and-so is not distancing enough. I can't believe they went to this place. So-and-so wants to vote for this person. They said this. And it's like, we don't have to feel these negative feelings towards everybody. And maybe we'll all be a little less guarded and ingenuine if we don't assume that everybody else dislikes us. Because, I don't think most people aren't walking around every day thinking about, like, how much they dislike everybody. Most people, right? Like, probably the majority of people are just like, they're not even thinking about other people. They're just thinking about how to get through their own day. And I think once you realize that people generally don't care about you to as deep as an extent as you think, it helps you to release and kind of just be like, all right, I'll just do whatever I want to do, because everyone's wrapped up in their own thing anyways. And it's hard to say, like, it's hard to explain I hope that makes sense.
Well, it's like people are indifferent in a benign way, right? Like it's a very neutral situation. And I think, like you're saying, like people aren't, they've got their own stuff to think about. No one's going to think about your music or your art or anything to the same amount. But it's interesting.
Social anxiety,
and where we get into the actual like evolutionary basis of all this is that humans evolved across like hundreds of thousands or millions of years as pack animals, and our survival depended on social acceptance within our small pack, which would be basically like 20 to 30 people. And if you lost the pack, then you were basically going to be eaten by wild animals. So evolutionarily, we haven't actually changed as organisms since that time, but now we're all like chilling in our room on the internet making beats. We're not like, chasing a gazelle for 3 days, wearing it out before we can throw a rock at it and trying not to get eaten by a crocodile when we cross the river. So it's important to understand that level of anxiety is like hardwired into our literal life or death survival mechanism. And once you
Right.
can kind of like isolate that and like take precedent over it through self-understanding, as it were,
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
you're so much more free to do all these wonderful things. And I really love what you're saying, even just like where we started this conversation, that once you had a child and your family was growing, then that just kind of naturally, like any tension or whatever, the mental box that was around your music previously just kind of naturally dissolved. Like your sense of perspective totally shifted.
Totally.
Yeah. We're talking with Lynden Williams. Lynden has a project called Divorce Court, which is super dope. And he also has another project called Dream Tax. Lynden's also a documentary filmmaker and filmmaker editor in general, father to 2 beautiful children, happily married, and he works as part of the team making the One Thing videos from Ableton. Incidentally, whether you're using Ableton or not, but especially if you are and you're feeling a little bit stuck in the studio one day or a little bit bored, then I think the One Thing series is one of the greatest things on the internet to just like give you a sudden jolt of inspiration or like something fun or new to try.
Yeah, it's really great, man.
Yeah.
It's quite hard to come up with a good idea for one thing that people can, like me as an artist, I'm always trying to think like, what would my one thing be? But I think that writing over other tracks is really simple, but it helps me a ton.
That's huge. Yeah. It's just these amazing insights. And I mean, like, like I've talked about actually Ill Gates, like I talk about Dylan quite a bit on this stream. I'm a huge fan of his.
He's so nice. I love that guy.
Yeah.
He's so nice.
But just like his clarity of thought around music and like his, different perspectives, career strategy, all the way down to like, here's the exact setting to put this one thing on, like his ability to tie all that together is phenomenal.
And do so much. He's just doing like so much all the time.
It's
crazy.
So I was gonna say, like, it must be quite intense with someone like him. Like, well, what's the one thing that you're gonna make the one thing from him about? Obviously he chose his famous mud pies technique, which is brilliant, and I actually employ that all the time. I think the way that he codifies things as well, and like gives things like a really specific name, so you can go like, oh, I'm going to use this thing. Whereas like, I can think of plenty of times in the past where I have done that, but not actually gone like, oh, this is a thing that I can reuse. It was almost like something that happened by accident in a specific moment. And I failed to kind of like turn it into like a library or something like that.
CV, is that how you say it? CV Music?
Chevy. Yeah, that's Zach up in Calgary.
Zach's been saying some really cool things in the comments. I'm glad we feel the same. It's cool. I like this idea of the fear of being exiled, right? It's like we live in a world where suddenly one thing is going to be your demise. It's just false because of what our online lives, create these like false expectations. But Chevy, that's cool. I've been reading all your comments.
Yeah. Zach, the mud pie is the basic idea is you just twiddle everything like crazy and record it, and then grab some good bits. And you guys see me doing versions of that like all the time on stream. It's just like, here we go. We'll have something and we'll just like set up a bunch of effects processors, but you record the output so that you then can go through and like grab bits, resample them. You kind of bake in all of your processing, and it tends to open up a lot of room for something spontaneous to happen, for like a surprise to happen, but then also you get it much more into when you're able to treat your sounds as audio, as opposed to like, here's a channel that's going through a ton of plugins. It gives you a whole different vibe as well. So so guys, Lynden was just talking, but he just said he wanted to specifically shout out some of his favorite sample pack creators, and you're just talking about Samples from Mars. Can you just let everyone know about that again?
Yeah, so Teddy, I think Teddy Mars is his artist name in New York, but I have so many of his drum machines, and I'm like, it's honestly like to the point where I have so many good kits from him, I've lost my lust for like hardware drum machines right now. Mm-hmm. Like I have my dream list of a few drum machines for the studio, but like his samples are so good. What you're hearing on Desulk 2.0 is the track is his drum tracks sampling, and the way that he samples is really nice. So that's a big one for me. And then Elephant, obviously, he makes some really great packs. He has a free tape effect for Ableton Live that I think is really cool. I use it a lot.
Sorry, what was that one? Elephant?
It's Elephant. ELPHNT.
Okay.
He's a really cool creator, and he makes a lot of really great video content.
Oh, amazing.
And then Patches.zone is someone I reach for a lot.
Yeah.
Like guides and inspiration or packs. And then Brian Funk, formerly Afro DJ Mac. He puts out a new instrument every month.
Okay.
In Ableton Rack. That I really love. But yeah, those are like some of my favorite. Oh, and one more plugin that like this creator is like so unknown that it kind of blows my mind, but Psychic Modulation.
Okay.
He has like 3 or 4 plugins, and I kid you not, they're like the most analog sounding. One's a synth, and the other 3 are like effects boxes. But I use his stuff so much, and I'm surprised that more people haven't caught on to it.
Okay, that's right. Okay, thanks for these. Let's make sure that we link these up. I mean, show notes is what they say on podcast, but we'll put those all in the thread afterwards. Do you know any of these people personally, Lynden? Like, do you send emails saying hey?
I'll hit up. Me and Brian Funk are good friends.
Okay.
We'll talk every once in a while. I'll hit up Elephant like on Instagram, but we don't really. Yeah. Cool.
I'd love to invite the One Complete Producer Network and stuff as well.
Oh yeah. I'm sure Brian would love to be on.
Awesome. It's really refreshing to just someone saying like, these are where I get the great sounds, instead of like you're supposed to have like a vintage Juno and a vintage Stratocaster or whatever, you know what I mean? It's really lovely just hearing that, I think. And I gotta say as well, like I've got, there's one particular company I personally really, really love called Rattly and Raw, and just being able to find like these really interesting, very specific, very quirky people who make like stuff like they wanted. It's kind of like, it's a bit like with modular. It's like what's so great with modular is like the person puts their own personality into that module, and when you get, you can get these libraries that are really built in a very specific way, then the way that you can then combine those, it's just a way to like differentiate yourself and set yourself apart, and the way you curate these sounds. And I think the fact we got to talk about how much effort you put into library building, and we dedicated so much time to that, I think is really important. So I think that's what really hit me with your music, is it's just like the kind of the feeling of it. And it's not like, oh man, the lows are so deep or the highs are so crisp. It's like the texture and the feeling of the sounds. Kind of,
I'd rather not talk about like the mixed technicality of it, honestly, because I feel like if you were trying to get all nitty gritty, you could put it on certain monitors and find all the flaws. But that's like, that's why it's running it through like tape sounds is fun, because there's no like, it's okay if it doesn't sound perfect.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest thing, I think, is that it doesn't have to sound perfect.
I couldn't agree more. And like, I really found it's kind of fascinating when you get into a situation where you have really good monitoring. Like, I think a lot of people would be astonished how bad some of their favorite records sound.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say, like, you probably can tell. I mean, you heard the vocals without anything behind them, but in LA, you know how expensive it is to live over there. And in Frogtown, we just found like a small duplex, and we're paying a lot. But my studio was actually in an untreated garage with cement floors, and that's where I recorded the vocals, and that's like where I mixed the whole track. And the weird like bounce back maybe like added to like the weirdness of the delays and the vibe of the song. But like, don't wait to treat your room to like finish the song or record the vocals, because just do it on the next song. Finish this song and then move on, because I used to think every song was so precious and that I had to wait till it's perfect. But you're gonna make so many songs. It's like, just keep going and do what you can with what you have.
Totally.